Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Big Boys Table. It's episode 37, Double December!
Oh shit, your chins and your chromosomes have been doubled by a wizard. Are you feeling lucky?
Yeah. That's just because I can shit in my house now, though.
Oh, yeah. Didn't you, move to the gas station or something?
Dude, it was epic. My father said... All right, we got to explain this. This whole podcast is going to be a shit show in many different respects. Some cases, literally, because I'm about to talk about shit. But
it's the crapcast.
It's the crapcast. But after we finished this anecdote, which we commonly open the streams with, or the recordings with, we'll be able to talk about actual substantive discussions and review December in general. So,
are you saying your shit is not substantive? Are you just popping them out like little rat pellets?
It's insubstantive. It's a little liquefied. So
I still find rat pellets here and there.
I found a bunch of that when I was finished moving. I moved all my shit around and I saw a bunch in the corner.
Didn't you have a pet mouse?
There's 10 of them. One of them popped up towards the end. They were actually just in the middle of my streams in the morning. They would climb up and I would just go, "Hey!" And then they would run away. And I'd be like, "Oh, they ran away. I wonder why, guys. That's weird." And the stream would have a good laugh. But yeah, so the whole move thing was really insane. I didn't really go into too much detail about this. I guess I was saving it for this. No real reason. I was so caught up in actually doing it that I forgot to talk about it. But it was really funny. So the reason why the move happened, I didn't think it was going to happen this soon. I actually thought it was going to be delayed. I thought it was perpetually delayed because my grandmother died in March of I guess it was 2019. I guess it was earlier this year. But I thought it was even earlier. I thought it was 2018 or something. Anyway, it's been a really long fucking time when she died. And when she died, we thought we were only going to have a month left in the house because it was in her name. But instead, it just kept getting put off. And half the family on one side wanted to sell the house immediately. But then they lost the ability to do so. And my father and some of my uncles became the fucking guardians of the shithole and started throwing dog shit around. Yeah, so it's just insane, the level of backdoor politics that happened, stuff that I'm never going to get into because I even don't really remember most of it. It's just in one ear and out the other. But suffice it to say, it was very silly. It was just a host of very silly things. And at the end of it all, what actually got me to move was my father kept saying he was going to shut the electricity off in December. And
what?
Because the bill finally went up to a point. I think it was in October or something when the bill finally got so high that they shut it off, even though it had my grandmother's name in it. But again, this is almost a year after she's dead, and they still have her name on the bill somehow.
So nobody was even paying the bill.
Yeah, oh yeah, nobody had been. Well, even when she was alive, nobody was paying the bill. It hadn't been paid for I think close to 5 years. So we just weren't.
I'm surprised you had electricity for 5 years. They would shut that down in a day here.
Yeah. So, she was terminal or something, so they couldn't. But she was terminal for that long, and then after that,
as a comparison, someone I know moved into an apartment, and the previous tenants had unpaid power bills, and they forced it onto him and said his internet his whole electricity, everything would be cut in that week if he didn't pay their power bills.
Yeah, that doesn't happen at all here. So what happened is eventually it got changed to my father's name, and they just restarted the account at zero. So then he didn't pay at all in October or November, and then come December, he was like, "Well, I'm not paying this, so bye."
The difference between first and third world countries, boys.
Yeah, so basically, at the end of that, when December came around, it wasn't. He kept saying it's going to be the first of the month, but the first was a Sunday or something, so they didn't send anybody out. And then he was like, I woke up on, I think the 2nd of the month, which was Monday. And he was like, he called me at some point. He's like, "Is the power on there?" And I was like, "No." And he's like, "Yeah, it is." And I was like, "What?" There's nothing has power. And he's like, "I know it's on." And I was like, "What the fuck?" And he's like, "Yeah, I had your uncle go downstairs and turn everything off. I'm trying to get him to turn it on for only your room." And I was like, "You already fucking called a moving truck. Why are you trying to keep my power on now? What an idiot. What is going on here?" It's just such a confusing mess. And then at the end of it all, he was just like, I can't do that. So, yeah, bye. And then I went back like 2 days later, and the power was back on in the entire house. So at the end of all of the fucking random moving that we had to do, I just go back there to continue moving some shit, grab some last stuff. Some guy bought my microwave for $10. That was cool. And it wasn't even his $10. Man, that was there's just so much shit that happens in that side of the family, man. Like, when I describe this stuff, I'm sure most people think, like, wow, there's a lot of drug addiction must be happening in that family. Yeah. Yep.
Well, the piss jars.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Like,
Piss
what the
jars.
fuck else would explain this shit? Like, I probably don't come across as a fucking man with lunacy in the family. Or maybe I do. I mean, you've seen my mixplay quotes, but like, at least I channel it through here instead of through a fucking crack pipe.
At least you don't have. Did you at least preserve the library of piss jars?
Dude, I don't even know where those are. I'm pretty sure there was only ever one, and it just kept getting dumped down the side of my house when it was full, so...
Did you ever, like, look at the side of the house and see, like, this giant, like, yellow, brown, red streak going out?
No, because thankfully the house was painted yellow, so...
Oh, okay.
It was a strategic fucking move. So you could
But did it,
get
like,
away with
destroy all plant life in, like, a 20-meter radius? You had, like, this giant dead spot in your lawn?
Yeah, I mean, most
Like
of the time it was
ours?
running down my fucking windows, dude, so yes. Because the guy was right above me in terms of where the house was. So, yeah.
At least you're getting, like, secondhand jankum out of it.
The funniest thing about that house to me, though, is still the fact that we have this guy, one of my uncles, we call him the garden gnome, and he basically just, like, he doesn't have a job as far as I know. He drives away sometimes. He's gone for, like, half the day, but nobody knows where he goes. Nobody knows how he gets money either, but he doesn't work. Like, he doesn't do any work. The work that he does is around the house. He'll, like, shovel and stuff during the snowstorms, and when he is not doing that, he's, like, cleaning gutters and, like, throwing ladders against walls at, like, 8 a.m. and just doing, like, raking leaves. And what was the other thing he was doing? He would there's these bushes that have been dead for probably about, like, 10 years now, and he every single year, like, multiple times a year, he's trimmed them. So they just shrink because they're not fucking growing, but he keeps trimming them. And I just imagine, like, that kind of person, that kind of human being is probably the same level of, like, dead inside as the average NPC that tends to these gardens or lights the torches in all of your dungeons and shit in, like, video games. It's like the same person who dutifully does all this work and then disappears for the rest of the fucking time so that the player never finds them and it breaks immersion or something. I don't know. It's just really strange. It's a very strange reality. So I'm actually much happier where I am now, even though the acoustics of the room are a little bit more challenging. There's probably more reverb noticeable, but maybe
Yeah,
not.
I can hear reverb.
Yeah, so it's a little bit worse in that regard. Before I was talking directly into the windows that were being covered in Jenkum, so now I don't. I'm talking right into a wall, and it's painted with reflective paint, I think. So it's pretty fucking bad for me, but I'll find out some way to actually have voice acting happen and better recording setup eventually. I'll probably just throw egg cartons on the walls or something.
You can just put like a blanket or some clothes, like a clothes rack, or even like some boxes, like cardboard boxes that are angled with the edges facing you. Like something just to like split the sound waves so they go to the side rather than back out. Yeah,
or something that will absorb it. I don't know how exactly I'll do that. I'll probably just like put down a bunch of tacks and then put those tacks into my my
mouth.
I was gonna say blanket. Just hang the blanket that way.
Well, I guess it depends on the kind of blanket, but
no, it's probably shit. It probably won't help at all, but at least I'll have a blanket hanging from the wall.
I mean, if the tacks would even hold it.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of heavy. So, yeah, that's double December. Now we're here, and we moved.
But now you have a functional bathroom, right?
Yes. So that is the upshot. Is the people that I was talking to, I don't remember if I actually explained. I think I explained this on a mod stream, but not in like the podcast. So another one of the things that would happen to me when I was at that the place that I was at until this month was random people would just come up to me, like obviously not completely random people, just people in the house. They might as well be strangers, but some of them are like family and other ones are friends of the family. And they would come up to me and they would just say like, "Hey, could you do this thing for me? Could you, if I got like the most recent example was if I bought a bunch of webcams and computers, could you hook it up for me and get me the best internet bill so that I can run cam girls from my apartment building? So these are the kinds of conversations I have where they launch into these 20-minute long diatribes about their plans, and then they never talk to me about them again ever. So it's just one time, 20-minute wasted, and it happens like at least once a week, probably more than that. And I just have to I've learned to just as they're talking to me, I'm just nodding and saying yes and walking away. And looking at them, but just walking backwards into my room, and I'm like shutting doors in between us while I'm still talking, and, and they keep going. And so yeah, that was my life, man. So the company is much better here. It's just my brother and my mother. It's pretty cool, and I'm dealing with we have animals here that aren't fucking mangy and filled with AIDS or whatever. So I got a dog that's a retard, and I got a cat that. Well, we had to throw out a couch when we got here, and it was pretty much because the dog would eat the pillows, and the cat would just the cat would just dry hump the side of the couch, and then he would get a urinary tract infection and be dead for 3 months, and that would happen at least once a year. So things are not necessarily it's not a panacea per se. It's definitely got its odds and ends. But I like it much better here. And the upshot is, indeed, I can shit. In fact, I did. Right before this podcast, I took a shit. And it was next door. It was literally right across the hall. The room that I moved into, literally, I opened the door, and I walk straight, and I get into the bathroom, dude. It's my dream.
Yeah, I know how much of a struggle it can be to not have a working bathroom, because at the last place, they dug up the road. I counted over 14 times in front of our house. Over and over and over. And then they would repavement it, and then they would dig it up again. And it was to fuck with the water, so we did not have functional water for about 2 or 3 months, which meant no toilets, no sink, nothing.
Oh, so how did you guys shit?
Well, let me tell you a story about diet management.
All right, before you say that reminded me of something else that my father said recently, where because his hands are so fucked up from lupus, he can't wipe his ass. He has to have assistants to wipe his ass. And that part in and of itself is kind of hilarious in a dark, twisted sense. The funnier part is what he said to my mother when he was asking my mother. They're divorced, and my mother is like, how are you shitting? With no plumbing, because the next thing he was going to say is after he turns off the electricity, his plan was to turn off the water as well, because he didn't want to pay that either. And so she was like, how are you going to take a shit? And he was like, well, I can hold it in. I've got it to the point where I can hold it in for about a week. He said, dead serious, no fucking sense of humor or anything. He was like, listen, this is the status. This is how we're doing it right now. So how did you manage your diet? Were you like my father, Mesk?
Yes. In part, yes. In part, I just didn't eat stuff that turned into shit.
Oh, so you just drank, is what you're saying?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually wonder if I drank only smoothies from the rest of my life. I wonder how that would work out. Would I even shit?
You
Probably.
might die.
Yeah, I might. But at least I'll have a lot of protein.
Probably wouldn't be a very pleasant death either.
Yeah, they're just body parts that start failing for no reason. Well, ever since I busted my ankle in June this year, I've had really psychotic, it's almost like PTSD, but it's not. I don't think it's that severe, but it's similar. Where any sort of, it was earlier today. I was running out to go to take the trash out or something, and I almost. It wasn't even a close call, but it was I could see where a close call could happen, where I could twist my ankle or something, or break it or something. And I was like, oh man, that fucking sucks. It didn't even happen to me. I was just imagining in my head. And it's that's been happening since June. I haven't, it's gotten better, obviously, because it's been a while, but that's another thing that's been fucking with me for a while, is just the idea that happens. And I don't really think there's any way around that, though. Apparently, when you break it once or bust it once at any capacity, it just gets easier to bust in the future, which doesn't help the paranoia.
No.
So, yeah, that's what that reminded me of anyway. But, yeah, what was I going to segue into after that? Oh, yeah. So how long did you go out without a toilet?
Over a month and a half.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean,
So,
the good
not
news.
as long, but
No, yeah, it's still shit. Like well, literally. But the good news for me is like, or the upshot is, it sounds worse than it actually was. When I was over there, I was still like going to walk around anyway. So the fact that I had to walk 30 minutes to take a shit just meant I had to get really good at time management and planning. And then otherwise, I would just, I would take slightly shorter walks to piss. Now I don't have to do that anymore. Now the walk is equal no matter what. The walk. And speaking of walk, apparently he blocked Dynamo. Nobody knows why. Please answer. So
he walked Dynamo.
Yeah, there's some walking happening. Now Dynamo's blocked by a Hitlerian French guy and walk. So I don't know. Explain that reality to me. But shit's been happening in 2019, man. There's a lot of things that happened this year that I didn't really envision, like moving and bearing witness to Bear Blower. And dude, I still can't believe Bear Blower, man. Like, you want to talk about the top 10 fucking simulations? Man, I never expected Bear Blower. Like, I could never expect it. Like, not in a million years. It would take so long before I would consider the merging of Bear and Blow as a name. Like, especially the context in which it happened, where nobody reacts to it at all. It's just some bitch's last name. Her name is Bear Blower. Why is her name Bear Blower, dude?
Well, I mean, just use some imagination.
Dude, that Bear Blower remix that Balathal made as well. There's like so many good lines in that where I'm just screaming. I'm like, I'm not a bear blower. I refuse. And then like any enemy was a bear. That mission, I was like, oh, we gotta blow him. Oh man, what a fucking mess. Dude, the fact that, like, the thing is, if that was the one insanity from that campaign, that would have been like, okay, all right, I can understand one insanity. I can't really, because it's really that insane, but I can sort of understand one insanity per campaign. But that fucking campaign was also where we had, I sent it to a guy to test it. That line. That line was in my YouTube chat as he's watching the stream of me playing shit that he's never seen before, even though he made it, because he didn't test it himself. Man, oh man, oh man. I could never imagine
not surprised.
That whole campaign, man. And then the sweet icing on the cake, the cherry on top, is that the campaign that campaign was a fraud of, a copyright infringement of, was worse. Like, he actually made a more tolerable experience than Malfurion's Quest. Man. And I'm... You know what's really funny is, like, remember when I kept saying, like, oh, I'm really gonna enjoy never playing the other version when they released, like, the other storyline, because it wasn't done, I guess. So they were gonna release like a new version. Well, the thing is, I don't think I'll ever be able to play anything like that, because I haven't been able to reinstall Warcraft 3 since Reforged got, like, shipped or whatever. Like, I can't even reinstall the old version of the game, probably because of some registry issue or something. But on top of that, I don't think that they will ever have proper support for older content, and let alone the content that you make.
Support 90% of the maps on Belnet right now.
Yeah,
they've literally broken everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a catastrophic fucking apocalypse of everything that you may have appreciated about Warcraft 3, like the custom content.
They've already started delaying Reforged. It got delayed to January now.
Yeah, I think it was the 28th or something, is what I was reading. Yeah. Something late.
I think they're going to need a couple more years to get started on it, honestly.
Somebody was tweeting out that they tweeted, like, I'm so happy that you guys have decided to delay this. I'd much rather see the game release later than it released with a busted launch and a lot of bugs and stuff. And I was like, don't worry, Blizzard will make sure that they do both, man. They delay it and fuck it up.
For that, man.
Yeah, like before they've even properly released it and launched it, they still broke everything. That's another thing I could never expect about 2019 is not only would Remastered still not have 2v2 matchmaking, which they said that they wanted to include since the fucking launch of the product in 2017, they also don't have like anything that they were... they actually fucked up versions even more. Like, now ladder, you can just get a black player color that you can't even fucking see in the minimap. Like, you literally can't see the minimap. There's a player color cyan, and I know it's Necron's favorite player color, happy birthday, but
Happy birthday.
You can't even fucking see it against minerals and gas because they use the same fucking player color. And this is something you can get in the ladder. Like, okay, yeah, I know you can just like switch to red and green or something instead of the default colors, but that
Not
doesn't.
Purple and green.
No.
That is a missed opportunity if I ever saw one.
Yeah, no kidding. But like, I know you can switch the state, but in 2v2 or team games, that doesn't really help you because all of your allies are the same color and all of your enemies are the same color. So if you got multiple of those, then you're just like, oh, I don't know if that's a Protoss or a Terran, or you just get fucked anyway. So it's still fucked. The fact that they released that, apparently they removed the colors, but if you set your color to random, you can still get it. XD! 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 XD!
Blizzard makes an update.
XD. So
XD.
that happened. Oh yeah, and then of course the bigger story there is Reforged. Everything about it. Man, I still can't believe they quote unquote leaked the client, you know, quote unquote unintentionally after the whole Hong Kong thing that happened.
Nope.
Man, and then
gotta divert that attention somehow.
Yeah, and then on top of
more
that,
characters gay.
Yep. You gotta make all of Warcraft 3 gay. Dude,
I mean,
I still can't believe that even though they make all these characters gay, they never share that information with China, where people think that if you're gay, you should just be hung or something. So they don't actually cross-pollinate any of it.
That's the truth about all the places that all the SJWs love, like Afghanistan and all the other Muslim places in China. Is they don't really share your views.
Nope.
But they have all the money, so
they have all the money and all the oil.
Oil.
Hell yeah, dude! I still can't believe Gorb is in StarCraft 2 co-op now. It's called E-Gorb. It's electronic Gorb, dude.
Well, I mean, isn't he like 80 years old or something now? You're gonna
Gorb?
have to upload his psychosis to the internet at some point or another.
I don't know how old he is now, but I remember after he went out of office for a while, he came back from his golfing trip or something, and he was like, I believe that the discrepancy between the two sides of the United States political system... He just started spouting off like Harvard-educated shit or something, like just randomly started using big words, and everybody was like, is everybody else dumber or is he smarter now? Like, what the fuck happened? Like, nobody could believe that. Like, that was pretty much the only time I thought about him after he left office. So
there's people on record saying he was the most intelligent and disciplined president.
Gays caused the Holocaust.
Gays caused the Holocaust.
Dude, Alex Jones. That's another thing I couldn't ever predict in 2019 is that Alex Jones would get banned from every fucking website imaginable except for his own. That was cool. And then, what else happened? I don't know, man. What exactly did happen in December? I mean, in 2019. How the fuck did we get here?
Well, the Democrats are trying to off themselves on their own swords as much as possible.
Yes, that is another thing that's happening.
Not really new, I guess.
Well, it's also global though. Like I feel like maybe it's just the result of everything being super. What's the term? Like it's a 24/7 news cycle. So they just got you like looking at shit all the time. And if you're on any of these social media websites, then you're also dealing with that shit.
Well, one thing you notice is that there's a big pushback going against the cancerous liberal movements now. For example, in Britain, there's a big push against it. Obviously, Africa has been very, anti-progressive in general, so they've got things figured out. Uganda is a very, very good place, and Rwanda, I think
that was the other one with the fucking
David
genocide.
Manning really liked, and the UK is a huge fucking clusterfuck, but it sounds like I don't really know too much about Brit-Bond politics, but it sounds like they're trying to get stuff in order. In either case, everyone wins anyway because there's so much like salt on Twitter from like the local minority who like forgets that there are a couple of other people on the planet that don't ascribe to a sanity. So, it's basically like Trump all over again.
Oh yeah, people talked about that too, where they talked about how everybody's like stuck on Twitter. And they think that Twitter is the world, and so they only talk to people who share their views, and they think, this is everybody. Of course, they use
like automated ban lists too, right?
Yeah. So they completely
so they don't even see dissenting opinions on Twitter.
Yep, that's really sickening in my head because like I just can't imagine. I don't. necessarily have a lot of time to go around looking for like, basically thinking about opinions that I hold and then thinking like, all right, well, if I was trying to get convinced of, the alternative, the counter opinion, how would I go about doing that? And how would I go about like steel manning my opposition in that sense to try to figure out like how strong are these beliefs and how good am I at arguing for them and like how true are they and all that stuff. Like I don't really have a lot of time to go do that, but if there's something in particular that I do want to do that with in it's something that also I could never have expected in 2019 is the fucking Half-Life games, because that's one of those things that I really don't understand. Is like I never never understood why it got so big, but after playing it I was even more confused. And so like obviously we'll come back to that point later on, but the fact that like that's something that really confuses me means that I've set aside time either now or in the future. I'm going to go out and look for dissenting opinions that are argued well and try to like challenge myself to combat those opinions, or maybe if I can't combat them, like understand what's good about them or what is well argued about them or something like that. Like that's actually what you should do as an intellectually honest person, you would think, is if you have this giant confusion about why so many people believe a certain way, you got to investigate that shit. You got to figure it out. You got to do some research. And I certainly just don't block everybody that doesn't agree with you. I don't understand that. Like that's the corollary is these Twitter people are just like, oh yeah, I'll block everybody. And I don't think it's entirely on the left either, but it's certainly what you see most is that most people who are on these block lists are like, or using these block bots or whatever. They're like,
like if you have somebody followed or you've ever commented on something, you just get auto blocked regardless of who you are.
Yeah, I've actually seen a few times people sharing shit that it's like tweet is unavailable, and I'll be like, oh, I wonder, I guess they deleted it or something, and then I found out that that's actually, well, it can be deleted, but if everybody else is like commenting as if they can still see it, it's probably because you've just been blocked by that person.
Yep.
So that happens a lot just because of people I follow.
Social media was a mistake.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting that even the people who run these companies are also addicted. They actually have to pay people to tell them to stop using their phones. Like, this is a real thing. Like, Facebook employees have to pay people.
Bring their phones into the office. It's so easy. Yeah. Just, tell them to work on their fucking job.
No, that's classist.
Apparently.
I really like the I really like the fact that like this brain drain shit has been so widespread now. Everybody's talking about this. It's like you've got all these problems with companies that don't really do anything. That these employees are hired either to fill diversity quotas or just because you got all this capital and you have to invent some imaginary jobs so that you can spend this money from investors that you got so that you can look like you actually need that money.
Yeah.
Or something psychotic. I don't really know how it works, but there's like a bunch of different reasons why you'd continue to hire even though you don't actually need these people. And then these people know that they're doing a bullshit job. And so of course they're not going to be happy about their bullshit job doing literally nothing, but they're not going to be satisfied. They're not going to get any actual satisfaction out of it. They're not going to get any fulfillment out of it because they're not doing anything. They're basically doing the equivalent of pouring, a water into a cup and then back into the original container and back again.
Blizzard.
Doing that.
BMP.
Yeah. For 8 hours a day or whatever. And then you got, then these people feel pressured at some point when the cuts start coming around. They've got to justify their position as if they shouldn't be doing that every day they walk in the fucking door. Like that just should be taken for granted. Like, oh, you're a good employee because you do the good work. Here's your that's all we need to say. Like it's very obvious every time you come in. Like you do some good work, and that should be the end of the conversation. But the fact that these people have to fucking spin and be like, oh. I made 10 balance changes today, boss, and it's all just like +5 damage to League of Legends champion or something. Like, what? At that point, what the fuck are you doing? You're not actually doing anything.
Welcome to the fate of all production software and why they just do nothing but change around the fucking interface and make it more of a mess.
Right, yeah, that's the same thing with like Photoshop, and you got to justify my job as a coder, as a UX designer or whatever.
Yep.
Man, the other thing that I think really contributes to all of this, and maybe it's just like a byproduct and not actually a cause, but think about all of the shitty language people use. Like when I get a notification because somebody retweeted me on Twitter, it says, "One new Twitter interaction." As if I'm actually interacting with somebody or somebody is actually interacting with me. Like,
welcome to marketing, man.
That's sickening, though. Like, not only does nobody ever say interaction in an actual sentence that way, they never would actually say like, "Ooh, 10 people interacted with my tweet." They would never say that. The fact that like they this is what it's called in the app. Like app. Yeah, that's another cancer word. App. Start your app today. Yeah,
That's
I
insane.
just don't know. I feel like that's contributing though. I feel like that is like more obfuscating. Like you the more you cloak what's actually happening, the more you dress up what's happening to be something fanciful or important, the more people who are not thinking at all about what's happening will be like, oh, I guess that's important. It's just like big numbers in a game or something. Point. It's just so crazy. It's like the bigger the words, the bigger the syllable count.
It's called ceremony. This all derives from the kind of ceremony concept. That's why loot boxes shake the screen and have horns and trumpets announcing now. Because it's all about ceremony. It's all about psychology. Marketing is probably like the most complicated and sophisticated and important thing you could ever learn. There's a reason why all the budget for game design goes into marketing and not the actual game, because the game doesn't sell the game. Marketing sells the game.
Yeah. I wonder at what point are they going to cross into some sort of diminishing returns for marketing where they'll be like, oh, maybe we should spend some of this money on the game.
It has been like this for a long. Like, in order for that to happen, you need to have something like the automotive industry, where you have like actual like recognized critics and people tearing this shit apart left and right, and people that actually like listen to them. Until you actually start like having consequences for doing the stuff that Blizzard does and Bethesda does, you know, nothing's going to happen. They're going to keep doing it because it's the cheapest, easiest way to make money. I mean, look at how much money Blizzard makes literally doing nothing. And then Blizzard just claimed $200 million from taxes. Like, for literally no reason at all.
Negative.
Yeah.
That's fucking
Even
sick,
though they have done nothing but just piss off people in PR and release shovelware for like almost 20 years now. And they still claim an enormous amount of money off of the taxes that paid for the development for basically all of that 20 years. And they still do nothing with it. And this is on top of basically just printing money for doing nothing. This whole system just needs to be just dropped on its head.
Yep. But it never will be. I don't think. It's just...
No.
It will eventually. It's going to be so fucking long, though. It might as well be never... Like, you and I may not fucking live to see it, is the way that it's going to be. Like... Society itself would collapse before the games industry. Oh man,
like it'll eventually burn out, but it's probably gonna take like another major leap of technology. Like, you might think I'm talking about like VR might have been a starting point if it wasn't so poorly executed and everybody wasn't so hooked up on deferred rendering and post-processing, because that represents a transition barrier, not to speak of the cost to the consumer that nobody's ever going to take. But, you know, say like, you know, 50, 60, 70 years, you have like holographs or something like that. Like if that actually became a thing and you started, you know, looking at like some meme Star Trek kind of shit, you needed like some kind of major technology transition that forces all the attention back onto technical stuff. Because one of the main things about old consoles, and yeah, there was a lot of shovelware, you know, like all of Sega's library is just shovelware, the Genesis was just shovelware and stuff like that, but there was a lot of, still a larger barrier to actually getting into it than there is now. Basically, anybody today can make a quote-unquote AAA game. Anybody can just walk up, spend $100 and end up with all the assets and resources they need. They never need to actually learn how to do anything. So they never actually spend that much time in production, and they never ever face any criticism because all expression is equal and everything is art. So there's like no actual hurdles to them just shoveling out crap. That's why every time you look on Steam, it's just garbage everywhere. Is because that is what happens when you remove entry barriers and any kind of requirement for actually like having content available to the public. When you remove all sense of like standards and gatekeeping, it's just you open the floodgates to just shovelware. That's why the Genesis was so much worse than Super Nintendo, because Nintendo had restrictions on publishing in that. And so all the shovelware went to the Genesis because, you know, usually when people wanted to push something onto the Super Nintendo, it usually, not always, but usually was something of a reasonably high quality, especially if it was from a studio that had a lot of projects in comparison to crap on the Genesis anyways. But yeah, that doesn't happen today. That hasn't happened for a long ass time. That was like the only case that I can really think of. And then games just got easier and easier and easier to make. Once you started hitting the PlayStation 2, you started seeing a lot of middleware. And then once you hit the PlayStation 3, it was just all middleware. And then at that point, people just stopped actually making games. They were just making mods. Sony had a engine that came bundled with PlayStation 3 dev kit, and that's what was used for the Souls games. And everything like them. And it was horrible and a disaster. And that was basically like that's basically the start of the real middleware frenzy. Was this just bundled engines and stuff like that, but that people wanted to use as opposed to actually, developing their own stuff. So they never had to hire programmers. They never had to hire any of these people who actually knew what they're doing. The demand for those kinds of jobs basically disappeared, except for the people who are actually developing those engines. So the most lucrative job right now for programming is actually probably being a shader programmer. Because that's still really complicated and difficult stuff. You could definitely get a job at Epic or something like that. One of the people making engines like Unity or Unreal, but game developers just don't hire that kind of stuff anymore, unless it's to just look flowery, because they don't actually develop games; they develop mods. Like Blizzard, for example, using Unity and the Warcraft 3 engine. 20 years later, they don't even understand how their own shit works. That's why they released remastered for all their games, and they just exploded everything because they don't know what they're doing. They don't have anybody on staff who understands how this ancient, unwieldy behemoth actually works. So they just kind of futz around. And it's not just as simple as hire outside talent at that point, because you get to the stage where you actually start having to hire people to reverse engineer your own shit, even though you have the source. And then that's the point where you start looking at high costs, and like needlessly high costs, as opposed to just doing the job right. Like the main rule of this kind of stuff is it's way harder to scale upwards than it is to scale downwards. But Blizzard has been perpetually scaling upwards, which is probably where a lot of their budget gets tanked, other than marketing, is constantly trying to rehash Warcraft 3's engine to support stuff like the netcode for World of Warcraft. So it's everywhere you look, it's just a disaster. And that is how they run business. And it's successful. And there's no one that says you can't do that, when there should be people, getting fired for making these kind of business decisions, because it's such a waste and it doesn't result in a good product. But nope, nobody holds any standards. People are berated for asking for standards instead. That's true peak clown world there.
Yeah, well, you know what this reminds me of is the fact that well, I can't get over the fact that people are actually berating other people for having standards, man. That's really something. Like, think about all of the argumentation you've heard down the years. You've heard what's a good example? If you don't have anything, well, yeah. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. if you don't like it, just shut up and let somebody else like it.
Yes.
Like, they equate feedback of a critical
or
nature.
Jay Barrino's classic, it's just a game, bro.
Oh yeah, well,
it's
games
just
are toys.
A toy.
Games are toys, dude. Man, I want some high quality toys. I don't know about you guys.
I mean, there's a reason why when people buy their their PVC waifus, that they try to get something that wasn't printed out of complete shit and painted by a mongoloid, because it's still a product and it's still something you want to be high quality.
So the other thing that this reminds me of is you mentioned the very sad reality that, generally speaking, what you have when you deal with game engine programmers or whatever is they're really only consolidated working for Epic or Unity or any of these other boilerplate game engines that people just mod in. And the conception is things are better because now level designers and basically people who aren't programmers can make a game, and they don't need to program in order to do it.
Yeah.
That's the idea behind the whole thing.
Idea.
The argument in favor of having these sorts of boilerplate game engines in the first place is, or not boilerplate, commonplace, just copy and paste shit, where you just have this standard situation, sort of standardized situation for game engines, is that more people can use it now. More people can benefit from making a game in the first place, or the ability to make a game. Similar to pretty much anything. Like, it's just accessibility argument as far as that goes. But it's similar to like now you have access to Photoshop or Fruity Loops or any of these other programs. Now you can do what previously you needed to, have a lot of equipment and a lot of training, specialty training and education and experience in order to make something of a certain caliber, or to make something that at least looks like it is of a certain caliber, whereas it may not actually be under the hood. And this kind of harkens me back to a long time ago when the Heart of the Swarm trailer was released. You actually made a comment. I think it was that basically people in their basement can do this. Like, it's not actually exclusive to the AAA or AAA industry now. And you also commented that they were using Vegas defaults, which is hilarious. But
yeah, they've been doing that for a while.
Yeah, so it's just interesting to me to consider that angle. Like, you actually are better off working for a company that's making these engines to license off to basically glorified modders if you want to be a programmer. Like, as a programmer, you are better off doing that. And one of the interesting things that happened more recently is Wuck, formerly mentioned, he sent a link in Special Bus that was discussing the collapse of civilization. I know it's very doomsday talk, but basically how civilizations lose knowledge over time. And how it may very well likely be due to progress, actually. Due to progress like this, what you could surmount to be progress anyway.
Well, think about it. Like, just in this example, think about games. Think about programmers. You eliminate the need for a skill that built the foundations of something that created that situation which eliminated the need for the skill. But you advance forward where those foundations no longer work. That's the place Blizzard's in. And now you need that talent again to go back and fix things or update them or create a new foundation to future-proof. But now those skills are much less common and much more expensive if they're available at all. And this process just gets repeated because it's all based on, minimum effort, maximum return, which means you don't want to pay people any more than you need to. That's why Blizzard cycles out people like, Metzen and stuff like that, is because they basically do nothing, but they're very, very expensive. And because they've been on staff for a long time. So, the longer you're on staff, generally speaking, usually the more you're going to be paid. But they're not doing anything, right? So they're going to cycle them out, quickly replace them with interns as much as possible. Like, I know a guy right now, and he's now considered a senior game designer. I think he's a senior level designer or lead level designer or something like that in Diablo 4. He's basically never designed a game in his life. He did some recolors in Warcraft 3, and that was it. And they called him a lead game designer because he was freshly recruited out of college, and he did some Q&A. And then within just a couple of years, he quickly ascended right up to a lead role because everybody ahead of him obviously got fired or moved around for costs. So now they have a literally who has no prior experience whatsoever. The most he's ever done is some level stuff in Diablo 3, and that's it. And now literally who is, in charge of, at least conceptually, one of the most important parts of the game. But it's cheaper that way, right? But this system can't work. Like, we haven't seen Blizzard produce a functional game since Diablo 2 Classic. So the system obviously doesn't actually work. And you can see it getting progressively worse and worse and worse and worse over time. This is a decay. It's not really just a decay in knowledge, but it's a cyclical thing. It's like a yin-yang. It's a decay of the need for knowledge. And that basically like applies to almost every single thing you're talking about. The standards and stuff like that, people don't need standards anymore. Just consume and like it, goy.
Yeah, and that's sort of what he talked about when it comes to the decay of knowledge or the decay in general, is he uses real world examples from his line of work as a programmer. He actually made his own programming language or something. I don't think it's publicly available yet, but it was because he was so dissatisfied with the programming languages that he had available to him. And I think he started to try to work in a bunch of different game engines before and had released games before, but he's making this with the express purpose of trying to be able to make a game. His name is Jonathan Blow, Bear Blow, by the way. You can look him up.
Blow!
So that guy's blowing bears, but he's also blowing the minds of young programmers out there. And he's basically what he's tried to accomplish is, in this talk that he gives where he talks about the collapse of civilization, there's a slide where he actually goes through every bug he encountered in like a single day or like 3 days, because 3, and he just screenshots these things where like he was trying to send an email and the email like was pasted in wrong or something. Like it looked like the margin was like 1 character long, so his entire message was in like it was in single characters stretching all the way down to the bottom, and all he had done was copy and paste it from another email, and it wasn't fucked up there. So he's like, that's a bug. And then he was like trying to play a game at some point. He's like trying to unwind after a day of programming, and he alt tabs and then he tabs back in, and the game is taking up like a quarter of the space it was previously. It's like, nice, that's great, I can't even play this fucking game without this bug happening. Like it's just, he documents it, and he had to stop after such a short amount of time because there's too many to keep track of. He encounters like 10 of them a day at least. And like the idea that you have to deal with that shit when ostensibly software is getting better. I mean, that's another thing that he pointed out in this talk is he actually talks about how hardware is getting better, and that's why software has gotten a free ride. And people think that there's so many things that you can do with software now that you couldn't do before, but that's literally just it's not because they're programmed better. It's because hardware has allowed for stuff like that to happen.
That is the leading cause why websites are so bad now.
Right, yeah, because they just have they assume
you got all these resources, let's use them. I don't need to optimize. Now you have 30 different domains being loaded. You have Ajax and JavaScript everywhere to do things that, a tiny fraction of HTML and CSS could accomplish.
Yeah, it's
and
just
sites
sickening.
Don't load without unblocking scripts.
I mean, just imagine for a second, like, I don't even know how far back you'd have to go, but I remember a time where websites like YouTube and Wikipedia and like all these other things that you'd use like 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Oh, I don't know how old YouTube is, like 2004, I guess, like 15 years ago. I remember
before Google got it.
Yeah, I remember them loading in a much more reasonable amount of time on much worse hardware. And like
that was before Google bought it.
Yeah, and just to think that you have to go back that far for it to be serviceable is so weird.
Like here's a readily available example. So I play these phone games, like Fate Grand Order, Ezreal, and stuff like that. They are sprite games. They use sprites. Well, to be more accurate, they use Live 2D, which is basically sprites but more inefficient. Now, the hardware on this is a Samsung Galaxy 4, something like that. I think it's using like an i5 or an i7 processor or something like that. Now, yes, it's a mobile processor, so their architecture isn't as good as the PC desktop version, but they do actually have SSDs. Again, still not the same kind of hardware as what I'm running in this system. I've got a 2 gigabyte bandwidth PCI Express SSD, but so it's not going to compete with that. But it's still an SSD, right? You're still not loading from a platter drive. But what has happened with these games, and this gets spilled over onto the PC too, it's the exact same thing as console ports. This is the standards that people do. Everybody uses Unity, so you can decompile the source if you want to. And these games perform like absolute shit. So Fate Grand Order usually runs at 1 FPS for me, which is insane. It can take so long to load that the tablet will actually fall asleep waiting for loading. There is so much access lag and stuff like that, and all the netcode is transactional, so that makes it worse. As opposed to, say, something like StarCraft, where it might hold your internet connection and then send packets. These disconnect and reconnect every time you need to do something. So there is a lot of loading just waiting for the internet that you cannot speed up even if you've got a fast device. It's so crazy to me, because like the hardware that's in the palm of your hand is infinitely more powerful than what a laptop would have been not even really that long ago. And yeah, laptops were never exactly anything used by gamers. They were never a standard anybody held to anything. But, when you think about it, when you're running something that's just a couple of sprites and some static backgrounds and then some simple particle effects, you really shouldn't need a hyper mega powerful Epic Pro PC. Look back to like StarCraft and Diablo 2. I mean, Diablo 2 is a good example because it's so badly programmed. It is probably one of the worst programmed games of that era. It is such a fucking disaster, and lore destruction made it a lot worse. And you know what? You could still perform that far better on a fucking tablet than games with literally a tiny fraction of the fucking content on screen. And that really should just not be possible. But it is possible because Unity is a piece of shit and nobody knows what they're fucking doing. Fake Grand Order, the file size imprint of this game grows every single update because they actually don't know how to delete content from old events. So the Japanese client, I think the footprint's over like 11 gigabytes now, which is, it's just crazy shit.
I actually think that even in like World of Warcraft early days, League of Legends early days, the same shit happened that you were just describing with file size imprints, where those games are actually much more runnable, much more performant. StarCraft 2. StarCraft 2 is a great example. You know why? Because in Wings of Liberty, load times are like 5 seconds, and in Legacy of the Void, they're 30. How the fuck does that happen? Like,
Probably
seriously.
The thing.
Well, yeah,
they
but
have to pull the streaming server pointlessly every single time they start out.
right, but like even before the streaming update, Heart of the Swarm was slower. So there's no explanation. It's just loading more information, but it's doing so in such an inefficient
is very
way.
Slow.
Oh yeah, that's
Cask
probably
is
true.
When they transitioned from MBK to Cask, they basically quadrupled their load times. When they rolled out the streaming update in World of Warcraft during Lich King, I think it was when they first started pushing this prototype to live. They basically turned like a minute load time into like 10 minutes of load time. Like the whole idea of the streaming was that you could load in earlier, which didn't happen. But then it made all the actual assets on the map load in much slower on top of it. So, let's say, for example, a common case, you're switching to an alt to check your mailbox for stuff you put on the auction house. Normally, what would have happened is you load in the game and then everything pops in and then you click your mailbox. After the streaming update, you wait forever to load in and then now you have to wait forever for the mailbox to actually appear. Because now it has to iterate through every individual asset and then iterate through every single thing on their assets. One of the main costly thing about Lich King, especially with this game and why they stopped doing stuff like this, is everybody loaded into the same small town, which is Dalaran. Dalaran was between 5 or 6 different zones. And because World of Warcraft doesn't use proper culling, you actually would load all the assets for those zones, and they would be on screen at all times. Depending on your camera, you get 2 or 3 zones on top of the entire town and like half of the game's population. And then this is the other thing. Unlike a game like, say, for example, Lineage 2, which is Unreal 2 Warfare era, or, newer games like, say, for example, Black Desert Online or Ion or Terra or whatever, when you have a character in an MMO or an RPG with different types of armor, what happens is they have archives that contain hundreds to thousands of different pieces of meshes with their own associated textures. So, basically a man's way of saying it is the game asks the server, it's like, hey, what do I need to load for this? And the server says, okay, here's your IDs. And each ID is associated to a mesh, which is then associated to its textures. Blizzard does this much better. All the armor pieces, hair variations, and other things like that, except for shoulder armor and weapons and shields, are actually a part of the character mesh. So they load this gigantic mass of several hundred pointless geosets. They're not very high poly, but what you actually encounter with a lot of these cases is draw calls and stuff like that are more expensive than the actual rendering of the asset. So then they have to sort through all that afterwards. So something you would probably see in Shankterium and the World of Warcraft series is I noted that there's a new bug where people will appear white, untextured, and have all their geosets active. That is a bug that never existed in the game prior to streaming. But ever since streaming was added, these kinds of bugs became more and more and more commonplace to today, where half the time when people log out, they turn white and their entire fucking geoset stack is displayed. And what have they done since Wrath of the Lich King? They've added even more geosets to the player characters, even more fucking mesh topology that is just hidden by the game. It's not really cheaper. You might think that, we hide this stuff so we're not rendering it. Yeah, that doesn't really happen. You're still accessing everything to actually see it. That is one of the reasons why it takes so fucking long to load characters. And in Lich King, that meant that you could wait for 15 minutes and you still haven't seen all the players load in the town yet. It's also one of the reasons why, for example, raids are so much more performance intensive in World of Warcraft than, for example, Final Fantasy XIV. In Final Fantasy XIV, you can have 200 people on screen and not really have an issue with performance. World of Warcraft, 10 to 15 people will usually destroy most.
Most what? You cut out at the end. You? Oh,
Yeah. I forget. I was looking at people who posted stuff in the chat. Yeah, like basically in Final Fantasy 14, the performance in that game is so much better than World of Warcraft. Even though they're using like higher resolution assets, more advanced shaders, their particles are way better. You know, there's more like audio channels and stuff like that. World of Warcraft just performs so unbelievably badly. And the sad thing about World of Warcraft is, that in spite of all this, it's one of the only games that's currently on the modern market that actually supports a real anti-aliasing.
Clown World, Honkler.
Honkler.
Can you believe that HH stands for Honkler?
Honkler.
Well, we got some real Clown World
clowns.
shit. Yeah, exactly.
I just like clowns.
Not only is our civilization collapsing because Blizzard can't code, but I got an even better one for you. So, I made a map for Mapperino. That's some real Clown World shit. I don't even know if that merits conversation, but since we're talking about the year in general, I suppose that was indeed a significant chunk of my time spent experiencing that. And like I was saying when the event was more recently concluded, and there's a whole bunch of random drama, and at this point I think it graduates to drama because like Necron's like pretending that he can take down all my channels or something, like threatening to mass report me, false flag me or whatever, which I thought was hilarious.
That's how internet wars are waged these days. People make bots and flag each other's online accounts. It's very epic.
Well, what was really even more epic is the response I received from Mixer support was, "Thanks for your concern about Mixer's safety." And that was so even Mixer thinks Necron is too stupid to do anything. Get fucking birthday, idiot. So yeah, there was that. But yeah, after all that, really liked what was it that he got so butthurt over? Oh yeah, it was Undertale. He was really like Undertale. Maybe he's one of those people who commissions sans porn. No, I think that what happened was Vorgaz liked Undertale, and he didn't agree with what I said on stream, and then I was laughing at him, and then Necron was like, "I can't believe you made fun of his dead rats," and I was like, "What? I didn't even know his rats were dead." And then he tismed, and then he spun.
Mountain.
Yeah,
Crazy Mountain, you go crazy sometimes, you know.
You know what's really funny is before that voiding, there were multiple voidings. Man, anytime a single voiding happens, you know it's not going to work out. But there was, I think that was the third voiding, the most recent one. So 3, of course. Why wouldn't it be? Anyway, the reason why I was Crazy Mountain reminded me of something is I actually had planned a campaign called Fraud Knives, and it was going to be, I made Patrick a young chrysalis that Necron had to carry around. Necron was like some worker. And the idea was that Necron had to lug him around around as a part of his training. And he had to bring Patrick to Crazy Mountain so that they could train together. And so yeah, that was a real event at some point in the campaign. You were supposed to like escort Necron as he carries Patrick onto Crazy Mountain. Meanwhile, like a bunch of black Polish women are attacking Necron because he didn't match with them on Tinder or something. I think that was the excuse. Like he was getting harassed by them, and like I had to save him from them. And then we were AI allies or something. I don't remember. There was some really insane shit. It's going to be a good campaign. Now I'll have to find somebody else to carry Patrick to Crazy Mountain and get attacked by black women.
Benja carry him.
Yeah, there you go. That can be part of his training.
He seems like he travels far and wide.
Yeah, he goes to some restaurant all the time and falls asleep while some Russian sings at him. I don't really get that one, but maybe that's like an inside joke or something.
He's probably like a world leader, like a politician. Maybe he's Trump. You never know.
Dude, you know what was really funny is that reminds me of when there was a giant influx of Russian people coming into my server a while ago. I thought it was like, I wonder which one of these is Putin. One of them is definitely Putin. So it's you, UED Commander. But what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So the reason why I brought up the Mapperino thing anyway is because I actually had a really good time making that map. I felt like I was able to really improve some of my skills, or really it was just like nailing down some really key concepts and improving in that sense. One of the things that I definitely learned about that was basically how to be a bit more, I guess, purposeful with the way that I was handling the map. Like I was trying to conceptualize the map as, I guess,
end result.
What happened?
An end result.
Yeah, like I wanted to conceptualize the map as like having biomes to it and gradations of different visuals. And basically, like, I went through this sort of thought process where I was thinking, what is the difference between a map that uses like a corpse or some other very striking visual asset to block pathing when you compare that to just like a rock or something that's like much more, again, like carbon copy, like scatter shot, copy pasted around everywhere. Like, what is the actual difference? What do you gain? And it is purely storytelling, beyond whatever small, minute differences they may have in pathfinding or something. Like, in theory, if you have two identical assets from the perspective of the gameplay impact they create, there's storytelling that can happen there. And one of those things, it harkened me back to a podcast we did where you talked about the craters and how that was like supposed to imply that there was ICBMs and stuff, like long range missiles that were used, and a bunch of other stuff that was going to be visual storytelling. Now, a critique of this style of making a bunch of corpses around is that you can't really recreate those. Like, you can't dynamically create those things. Whereas I suppose in StarCraft 2, you could probably like dynamically create those craters when the ICBMs impacted or something. So the asset would match, basically. It would be like a read. But at least in StarCraft's engine, it doesn't seem possible to like... I don't think it would be advisable to permanently make, dead units or something.
You're going to run out of...
sprites or something.
Slots, yeah.
Yeah, and even if you had an extender to meaningfully do that, it would just become a cluttered mess. Whereas, like, I get the complaint that you'd think that the assets would decay, but really they're just meant to sometimes block pathing or build space, but otherwise instill a sense of the unit composition, the scale, and basically the personality of the participants before you actually have a direct head-to-head combat with them, if they are in fact people who were here before or are still here now or something like that. Like, you could use that for a variety of different reasons that may never come to pass in terms of actual gameplay. For example, you could have a faction that was here that you're actually trying to chase down, and you see like them having remnants of a battle that they had fought before you got there, but they're not in this particular mission. You have to get through like some of their lackeys or something first before you find that particular faction. The idea that you can sort of learn what their strategies were or some sort of information about what they actually like to do, but in the mission that you're not even fighting them in, can be pretty useful information, I think. You can get some sort of valuable gameplay insight just from looking at the battlefields if they're done so in a purposeful manner. And I didn't really get too far into the visual assets that I needed to produce for the map that I made for Mapperino, but I do feel like I was able to at least acknowledge that there was a vacancy in the design philosophy that I was using, and I was able to sort of like, I guess, fully justify and steelman the position of trying to use these corpses or these other like battle wreckages as set pieces in maps, like visual set pieces, to not only tell a story but also to give vital gameplay information to a player before they may need to or have the opportunity to fight whoever's in there, or fight alongside whoever's in there. If it's supposed to be an AI ally, you could still get important information about your allies' presumed preferences as their personality or whatever. I feel like that is valuable for the sake of an RTS, and just like it would be valuable to come across a corpse that maybe you don't normally see in an FPS game, but shows you like maybe like has signs of damage, like from an acid or some sort of like caustic chemical or something, and that can be like subtle storytelling that, oh, this guy died not from a normal weapon but from some sort of chemical, and then that can segue into you eventually facing an enemy that actually uses that, and that's like, haven't faced that enemy yet, but you can still see the destruction that they caused. Even if that can't happen organically in the battlefield, it would be nice if they could, but in this particular context, given that we know that it's ill-advised in something like StarCraft to happen, I still think you get something useful out of it, and it's not enough to just dispense with it entirely because you can't create it in that organic sense all the time or whatever. So I don't know what you think about that.
Very similar to what I do in D&D, actually.
Oh, okay.
It's like one-to-one what I do in D&D. I'll talk about something now. If for some reason somebody's listening to this who actually plays my D&D games, you should probably not listen to this because this is actually going to be spoiler stuff. They are walking into an area right now that is probably going to be the most dangerous area of the game they have encountered by a considerable degree. We are now reaching like the difficulty of the areas that were like those short adventures I talked about before, where they were like very high difficulty and it wasn't really like a lot of information that was handed to them.
Right.
But in the campaign to this point, they've generally had a lot of safety nets in some regards. There's some death mechanics depending on if like someone died in a specific area. There is some like mechanics that they can potentially take advantage of to not have permanent death. Also, one of the characters does have a revive spell. One of the player characters, that is. And generally speaking, they've had pretty powerful NPC allies. Some of the fights they've been in, they've had a really high risk, and they've created a lot of dangerous spots for themselves. But it's been usually something that's been like sort of semi-calculated on their behalf. But now, like a lot of the safety nets are sort of gone, and now they're entering an area that's actually pretty dangerous. And basically, I'm just like setting them loose in it, and it's like a giant maze. And to make matters worse for them, they've actually like accelerated their arrival in this point to the stage where they're not actually going to have the primary mechanism for like navigating this maze. So they're supposed to gain a spell that lets them turn into a cat, and then as a cat they can actually like see their destination and where they're coming from through these dimensional gateways, because it's basically like a paradox, a maze of like dimensional gateways. And as a cat, like only cats can navigate the maze is how it goes. But they don't have that because they initiated it early accidentally, and the deity who's going to give them the spell wasn't able to prepare it in time. And he's actually going to lose his mind, so he won't be able to help them anyways, even when they find him inside of it. Now, this maze is full of all kinds of really, really nasty shit, and most of it is hidden. Most of it they won't know about until they trigger it. So you kind of don't want them to be at a point where they could like go in a corner just trying to tentatively explore and then they like awaken some old god or something. You want to have like some kind of indication that some areas are more dangerous than others. And while the characters and the players are already fairly cautious, some of this stuff you really just can't like, normally look at and say this is going to be dangerous. And, there's some things in there that aren't dangerous that can actually be beneficial to them. So you need to have like some kind of like read that doesn't necessarily give away what they're looking at, but tells you at least a little bit of a story of what happened around them. So usually my areas are littered in some kinds of interactive something or another. Now, it's easier to do this in D&D than in something like StarCraft, because in D&D, you can't always, in fact, you really can't prepare for everything they're going to attempt to do. Like, I didn't know they were going to accelerate this maze thing so fast. I had no idea this was going to happen through the conditions they did it, but things kind of spiraled out of control from one thing to another, and before I knew it, we were looking at an early activation. And, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it shows you just can't prepare. Like no matter how many years you've been running this, you just can't always prepare what they're going to do. So a lot of what information you hand to them ends up coming improvised. But a lot of my preparation process is setting up my tools in such a way where I know what kind of information makes sense to be really consistent. Like for me, one of the most important things about information distribution is consistency. So you're talking about the craters and stuff like that. So the craters can just be a decal, and I can just spawn a decal as a part of impact effect. That's really easy to do. Now, something like that also happens in D&D. So, for example, they've come across, they're in an area right now which is like basically a giant free-for-all. And every now and then, I run internal resolutions that basically determine what happens in the background. And sometimes it leads to things that are very silly. Like huge fights happening, and then, they come up and like everything's already dead and there's just a bunch of stuff they can steal. So, for example, they were in a castle and they were fighting some orcs that blew down a wall. And then the orcs were fighting a bunch of these like giant worms in the background. But a bunch of the orcs didn't actually join the fight. They kind of just camped out in the front because it was so far away. And then the fight ended and the party had a rest. And the rest of the orcs were still camped out in the front with their honorable campfires, honorable tents, and their tanks. And then what ended up happening is the internal resolutions said, hey, the church is going to attack now. And I rolled resolutions for how well they sneak up on the orcs. They get a 20. How well do the orcs fight back? They got like less than a 5. So basically the way this panned out is the church assassinated all of the orcs without a fight. Now the church doesn't have a need for any of the supplies the orcs have, because the orcs have like bullets and 30mm shells and stuff like that. The church doesn't really do that. They use like holy prayers and crosses and stakes and stuff like that. And so they kind of just leave all this stuff behind. And so now the party comes out, and they don't really know what happened because now they find all these orcs that were camped out in the front, but they're all dead. So now, the party wasn't there to see the church. None of the church remained. They have no way to actually know that the church attacked them, but they're going to investigate the bodies to figure out what happened. And then this is the part where you could tell them, oh, the orcs have like stab wounds in the back of their necks and their backs and stuff like that. Most of them died in their sleep. A lot of them didn't move. All the tanks are all lined up still in their parked positions. A lot of them are still like guarding the gate and guarding the door and like their scouting outposts. So like the way they're positioned, it tells you that there really wasn't much of a fight that happened here. They were all completely caught off guard and all died really, really fast. So like that's one way we tell a story. Like we don't even name our attacker or tell you precisely what happened, but just the way in which we see how things are distributed around you when you come across this tells you that everything died in a really specific way. So, like a counterbalance is they go into the basement where the worms were, where the big worm was, and the orcs had a separate attack that forked into there and attacked it. Now, as opposed to the orcs that died in the front, the orcs that died in the basement, their shit is just strewn everywhere and there's craters all over the place. And there's holes in the wall, like glassy holes, because the worms are basically made out of like very, very hot flesh that burns like the surface of a sun. So they burn through walls and leave behind these glassy holes. So they have glassy holes and stuff all over the place. They put two together and say, hey, the worms ambush the orcs in the tunnels. The orcs push through. There's fireballs and craters and empty casings and stuff everywhere. Really basic stuff. But we set up a really like basic consistency so that people put together the story of how stuff resolved behind. And this is how we tell you what kind of threat also remains ahead. Because now the players can now look between these and they have an idea of how the orcs were ambushed, how they managed to push through, how deep they managed to push through without actually going into the big worm's hideout and finding, the remainder of the orcs. Basically, the resolution says that orcs pushed down really well, really strong, and then they jobbed and they just got exploded on the final fight. So all the orc shit in the basement is just strewn all over the place, all destroyed, all haphazard. There's no end boss visible because it's hidden, but everything that the orcs had is down there and it's all obliterated and scattered everywhere. So that tells you, right off the bat, there was a big fight and they lost hard. So now the players know that this is actually probably a dangerous fight that we don't really want to deal with. It turns out they didn't have to deal with this fight because the boss had actually retreated because it didn't want to fight them anymore. But there was another ambush waiting for them instead because they had come back. This was the second time they had been down there. The first time they came down there, they met it, then they didn't fight it. And this time it anticipated they would come back and it just left behind a trap for them. So they had to deal with that. But the way in which like they inspect the bodies and I describe like how this died. Like, is there burn marks? Previously they encountered enemies who were just bisected in half with what looked like a heated blade. So they knew that there was some kind of opponent in here that they had not encountered yet that moved very quickly. And this was someone who actually turned out to basically be their ally. So information distribution, like the main thing about D&D is that it really trains you to kind of police the pacing at which you hand out information. Because you don't want to give people too much information. Like in this maze, they're going up against a lot of supernatural enemies they don't really understand. And when they go from area to area to area, they're going to encounter basically remnants of previous groups who are also trapped in this maze. And now we have to resolve, like, how do those groups die and what did they leave behind? And how can that tell the players what happened and how they died without actually telling the players that everything they touch is literally a bomb? And so, we have to, like, think about our scene as a story. We have to, like, play out precisely what happened in the scene before we lay it out. So if, say, for example, we're placing bodies around and we're placing craters and stuff around, we envision in our head, why are these there? Like, we literally play out the actual fight in our head and place things according to how they happened. We don't just strew things around and then justify them in game. The only thing I'm improvising in this respect is how I'm describing them. I don't write ahead what my descriptions are. I just improvise what I'm writing, but I have my tools set out before me that the scene is laid out in this way. So say, for example, the orcs put all their tanks at the back of the hallway so they could shoot stuff at a range, but they got ambushed from behind. So there'll be a wormhole behind them, the tanks are stuck in front of it, and then all the craters from their cannons are in the distance on the far end of the hall where they were shooting at other opponents. So I put all those assets in, and then when we actually come to the players, like analyzing them, then depending on how hard they actually want to look at this content, I tell them what happens. So in the other adventure, they were in a underwater science lab kind of thing, and they found like was a medical facility, but it didn't have any controls. There was nothing that a user could control on it. There was no buttons, no consoles, no computer screens, and they spent a long time analyzing it because it was just completely covered in blood. And but there was no like bodies or body parts there. So, they were able to assess that somebody was doing something here, but it had to have been somebody who controlled the system through some means other than like through their hands. So this kind of tells you that maybe there was some kind of AI or some kind of machine or other some kind of communal thing that was active, and then whatever they were looking at are no longer here. So like we just put the assets in. That's just like a simple set of images that just depict these things, and we describe them. But we really like pace it to how much people actually want to look into it. But at the same time, I try to design things in such a way where you can figure out what is happening without actually asking me. Like the whole reason why I go through the effort of making these maps and the assets like that is so that they can tell the story with me writing as little as possible. The less I have to write to tell you what's going on that you shouldn't really need to ask for, like what does this look like? What does it look like happened here and stuff like that. The more that we can focus on the actual like character to character interactions and stuff like that.
Right. So it's basically like the less I have to, like a good corollary, I think, based on what you just said there, where you're talking about less is more in that sense, where the less work you have to do on the writing end and the less explaining you have to do for the players, the quicker you can get back to actually, playing as a character and interacting with the other characters. Yeah. So in an RTS context, the less I have to have transmissions say, a great battle was fought here, and this, X and Y happened. Basically, having a speaker do what you would be doing in the writing department, but in an RTS context, the less I have to do that, and the more I can do with just visuals, the better, because then the player can just immediately take into that information, choose to do what they will with it, choose to interpret it how they will, choose to ignore it or not, choose to pay attention to it or not, and then move on to actually playing the game and going back to that, right? It could be stimulus that can be taken in stride, or the player can spend a bit more time looking at it than maybe some other player would, and maybe get more out of it depending on how I set up the fights. I also really want to echo what you just talked about earlier about saying, like, actually trying to imagine how the battle would take place in your head. Like, I do the same exact thing now with the way that I allocate doodads. Is not only would I, like, how would a real human being or a real Protoss or a real entity at all construct a certain structure so that it feels like there's a purpose to the way that the stuff is laid out, unlike all of the Blizzard space platform maps and all of the Blizzard temples and all of everything else that they made in Brood War and beyond for all of their games. I try to design stuff in the game worlds in general so that it's not just a battlefield. It was something before this, and what was its purpose? Maybe you can try to glean into that if you care about that sort of thing, but just to design it where it subconsciously exudes that information to you. It communicates that this was more than a battlefield, and now you're fighting over stuff that wasn't always the case. It's a little bit tougher to make that connection in Brood War because you have to somehow justify why minerals and gas grow everywhere, and obviously I haven't built an in-universe reason for that yet. I'm working on it, but when it comes to handling the stuff for actual construction of the environment beyond the resources that you're engaging with, but just the terrain features that you're engaging with, I try to take the same approach to that I do for something like an actual battle scene where I'm placing corpses and having other decals like blood and rubble and stuff that I'm going to try to place around the scene. It's like my idea behind it is what would actually happen in a real world scenario in this game to create the carnage that I'm now pre-placing. What can the player then take from that and say, okay, well, there were two Zerglings next to a fire bat. Well, that's pretty obvious, right? Or there's, a destroyed pylon and or a destroyed carrier and a bunch of green goop on the ground, and maybe you can, surmise Scourge smashed into the fucking carrier, and some of them are now, the remains of them have been on the carrier itself or on the ground or something, like any number of combinations. So I don't know what you think of that specifically.
Well, the thing is, there's a big difference between what I'm doing and what you try to do in StarCraft, because I can keep bodies hanging around for a long time, and you can interact with both bodies. So say, for example, you can loot ammunition from the dead orcs and stuff like that. Corpses in StarCraft, you don't really interact with those. They're usually something that decays over time.
Right.
So you do face a crossroads in which you decide, like, how much do I value this initial map content over something that, I want to keep consistent. For me, I probably wouldn't use too many, like, I wouldn't use organic bodies in a map because of that reason. But like when I use wreckage, I try to keep it like structural wreckage and stuff like that. So say, for example, that first map in Apex J with all the rubble everywhere, I was going to keep unit bodies out of it and mostly focus on structural wreckage because of that. But at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to keep corpses around longer to keep it consistent either. I did that in Warcraft 3. With StarCraft, it isn't necessarily bad because the corpses are always displayed underneath units instead of clipping through them, like in StarCraft 2.
Right.
So it's not as much of an issue.
Yeah, that's what I actually do in Hydra is I massively extended the duration that corpses are on screen. You can actually get a lot of important information on that anyway, just scouting, because you may not have seen the army, but you can see the remnants of what they're fighting. And that is more organic than just placing the corpse doodads themselves. But there's like a bunch of justifications in theory about how you could spin the presence of like Zerg corpses or whatever, because like it's all muscle tissue. It takes a while to decay, lol. But at the end of the day, trying to keep it more organic would be nice. And that's where that's the crossroads that you were speaking of, I think. So I don't know. I just feel like it's there's a good chance that. What happened?
Someone posted a naughty link in Discord and then hastily deleted it. But Ripcord lets me see it.
Gotta love Ripcuck.
Ripcuck has invited me to take part in some degeneracy.
Yeah, you can just take a screenshot.
Good. Like this is something I think you need to be like really careful in taking in moderation. I wouldn't use too many bodies. I would usually try to keep them off the beaten path, like away from around the player space, generally speaking. I probably wouldn't use them for blocking off passages. I mean, it really, this is a really like a case by case thing. Like, it's hard to really generalize this kind of stuff because I think in some maps it would work really well to have that. Like, say for example, you are on a battlefield map and there was like a whole bunch of destroyed bases and stuff all over. But when it gets to be larger scale and assessing certain kinds of information off the bat, like I generally try to keep my doodad count low, anyways. I generally try to avoid even having doodads in areas that units can path, unless it's like really subtle stuff like grass. So, but you are also making your own doodads. So you already have doodads that are already like lower on the the visibility, let's say. So I think it's something that you can probably make work, but it's something that it'll probably be one of the most difficult things to get working to make consistently correct. Because you're gonna find, probably I've already seen some people say that, that it's difficult with raids and stuff like that, but that's a small sample size as well, and it's new, so you can't always take immediate gut reflexes as the response to this, but it is something that I think it can work, but you have to be really careful with it, and it'll definitely be a case by case kind of thing. But it is like having the body stay longer and stuff like that is always been an interesting thing. But something you may want to consider when you do that is actually having some slight random variations to their death sprites.
Right, yeah.
So that they're not like say for example you killed 50 Hydralisks. Now you've got all 50 of the exact same bodies sitting around, and it will be a lot more obvious when they last longer. So you probably want to make some slight variations to them, which kind of ramps up your development costs. So
it shouldn't be too difficult. At that point, you can just do a random conditional jump in the iScript to different frames that you add in later. So it's not terribly overhead, not terrible overhead. You can probably just shuffle some parts around in Photoshop and use the what's that tool the cloning tool. You just quickly scrape some shit up there. That's my bread and butter. But I'm sure there's some ways to do that. That's a good suggestion. The other thing that I was thinking about is finding some way to justify placing destructible assets in certain areas, because I don't like the idea that these assets are here to block shit off, but and it's in perpetuity, but that requires a pathfinding rewrite, which Corsetti's willing to do, but is probably going to be one of the more challenging things to do, because he also wants to have bridges and ramps that you can destroy and rebuild. So that's a little bit more out of my thought wheelhouse, because I haven't really thought too much about that. I've usually just written off features like that as like they're reaching too far and they're dust and broodering. But I think it's positive. Like one of the things that I was thinking about is I can't ever really place destroyed command centers or nexuses or hatcheries or anything like that unless I want to make the player, force the player to build somewhere differently than what they should do for optimal mining, or unless I'm trying to show like a base that was previously mined but now it's completely mined out or something. And the latter version doesn't work since I've made resources regenerate over time and never deplete, so you can't have that. But even before that, I didn't think that was great, because it's like it's literally just a set piece, which, okay, that's fine, I guess, but it doesn't really accomplish anything from a gameplay standpoint. It really just shows off that I made some destroyed town halls, and okay, great. Yeah. But other than that, it doesn't really accomplish anything, so it doesn't justify the development cost, I don't think. Whereas if you could make those into assets that you can then clear and open up some more pathfinding and build space, I think that would be a better approach. It just would have to be used correctly. I don't think it's conceptually like the worst thing in the world. I think it can be used correctly. That's another thing, though, that would be like, again, ramping up development costs for the sake of placing units somehow that weren't really units. So we would need the unit limit extender or something, but just a bunch of other tech before we can really accomplish that. But at the very least, I can get a head start on the assets right now and implement them as doodads and see where that goes. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be a while before we have the tech to back up that idea. So that's just another limiter.
Like, it's always a good idea to think of things as, how can I make this something you actually interact with?
Right, yeah. Because like I do think that
especially what I do at D&D.
Right. I think the interaction right now is beneficial, because the idea is you get some valuable information that you would only get if you explored this area to find this thing that's off the beaten path, that gives you some information about what the enemy will do or could do, or your ally could or would do. And that can be beneficial, but beyond that, there is admittedly no interaction. So the idea that you can accomplish both that and also have the player, have to invest some time, or any player, even the AI, have to invest some time in clearing out this junk so that they can build a better, more well-structured base or something. And maybe clear out some passageways to unlock some stuff. Like an early mission in the remake of Inconsummate has a crashed carrier blocking a ramp. And it's almost like, it's convenient that the carrier came down here and blocked the ramp. But at the same time, if I could have an AI backdoor you by using that ramp, by blowing up the carrier, that would be much more engaging, and you'd have to actually watch it.
By bear blowing?
Yeah, exactly.
I knew it. So,
would be nice, but we'll think on that. Anyway, 2019 is... the end of it is just around the corner. It's another year around the sun. I don't know if you have any final words for us, but it's getting to the point where I have my heart out coming up. So,
yeah, you gotta tap out. No, I really don't have too much. That is short. My own real life has been an absolute disaster. I will say that if you are looking forward to certain LPs, I will have to disappoint, because I am considering LPing basically discontinued at this point. I'm going to try to finish editing projects. If I do record again, I would like to be able to finish the World of Warcraft series, but I really don't know. Real life has gotten to the point where I have no time, no energy, and I'm basically spent, and it's just going to get worse. So I'm hoping I can finish stuff like Sonic 2006 and the DMC edits and stuff like that, and edit the Dark Souls 3 stream I did a while ago. But it's things are looking pretty bad right now. So I'm afraid I'm probably going to be tapping out a lot on all content creation. I did puke up some stuff on map crap if people wanted some shitty Mimi voice acting that I used in that Warcraft 3 video. And then stuff I was hanging onto, I was trying to make a map crap out of before, but I didn't have the time, and then everything piled up, and that all got canceled. So maybe that'll be useful for someone making some mixes or something like that, but I'm afraid that's all I've got. So
yeah, just for now, hopefully we can see the revival of some other content down the line, but obviously you got to take time to make sure you focus on what you actually have to do. So it's unfortunate reality.
It's all a disaster.
A total annihilation, a doubling of chromosomes.
So that's all I got. I know you wanted to talk about level design and stuff like that, but I feel like if I go on a level design rant, it's probably going to take me like half an hour to go through it. So yeah, maybe it's better for the next one.
Yeah, that'll have to be for the next one, and we'll talk a bit more about it. I wanted to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. I wanted to talk about like the whole Half-Life thing more in depth, and all the sorts of stuff.
The corridor shooter.
Yeah, just like more thoughts on. What I'll do is some research and preparation for the next one, what I'll do is I'll actually go out and find those videos and like reviews that other people have done of the Half-Life franchise that come at it from a more positive light and try to make some sense out of their ramblings and see what I can find, because that'll hopefully help me illuminate this area of ignorance where I have no idea why people like the games, and curious enough to figure it out. So.
I don't think you're ever going to find it out. I think you're traveling down a rabbit hole in which there's only insanity at the end.
Yeah,
you're just going to come out of it feeling really disgusted.
That is my predisposition as well, but
that's what Sonic has taught me, because I've done this with Sonic, and people have done it with Sonic on behalf of me too. They've tried to search for answers, and yeah, the answers were not good.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, hopefully we find something at the end of this journey, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks, maybe early January or something, we can do another podcast where we talk about not only level design, like I was mentioning, but also the Half-Life shit, and I have a bit more to say on it. But yeah, I think that's really it. So,
yep, that's it. Smoke weed!
And see you in 2020. Bye.
Happy birthday, Necron!
You.